Okay, so my passage is in part 2 of The Glass Castle, and it's from pages in the middle of page 34 to about the top half of page 37. So the speaker in this book is obviously Jeanette, and it's a memoir, so she's explaining her previous life events, and the audience is us, I guess. The symbolism of fire I thought was really interesting in this book, which led me to pick this passage partially because I think it's really, really sad that she has to stay on her toes and she feels like her world's gonna kind of collapse into fire at any moment, which I'll get into later with what fire really means. But also in this passage, it has metaphors for their lifestyle through the symbolism of the Joshua tree, which the mom explains on page 35. I really like how the book uses symbolism and through inanimate objects to kind of explain how Jeanette feels and how she forms her opinions. And it also gives the reader a kind of clearer look into Jeanette's inner mind and how she thinks and how she feels about the way that she lives, the way that she's been forced to live, and that she doesn't know anything different. This particular passage had a lot of pathos in particular because when it's hard not, the whole book is pathos basically because it just really makes everyone kind of think and kind of how grateful they are for the families that they have. The whole book is pathos, but I especially thought my part of the passage I chose was especially had this rhetorical appeal because it explains just the part that was really meaningful to me was that she explains, I lived in a world that could any moment erupt into fire on page 34. And I think this just really further explains how fragile her life kind of is and how fragile she feels. So far in the book, the reader has gained a kind of perspective of what kind of family the Walls family really is and their living styles. This particular part in the book is really significant to the overall book because it gives the reader a further understanding of how kind of immature and childish the dad is, especially up to the specific point in part 2. A fire started where Jeanette and her family were currently living. Fire is a really reoccurring theme in this book. It happens a lot, and Jeanette is always fascinated with it, and I thought that was really interesting, which is a part of the reason why I chose this passage. She explains earlier in the book that fire has scarred her and she can never be the same. She explained that with her little Tinkerbell toy that she had on page 16. And I think that fire symbolizes the destructive chaos kind of that her family and her living style kind of forces on her, and it's scarred her and it's made her the person she is today. I think she's so fascinated by it because when she's young, she kind of agrees with everything her parents say, and she doesn't realize how her life kind of differs from other people. She doesn't realize that there's other things out there. So I feel like that's why she's so fascinated with it when she's younger, because most of the fires happen when she's a child. So she's kind of available to be scarred by her family and by their choices. My passage starts out in the middle of page 34, and she says, I wonder if the fire had been out to get me. I wondered if all fire was related, like Dad said all humans were related. If the fire had burned me that day while I cooked hot dogs was somehow related to the fire I'd flushed down the toilet and the fire burning at the hotel. I didn't have the answers to those questions, but what I did know is that I lived in a world that at any moment could erupt into fire. It was the sort of knowledge that kept you on your toes. When she says, I lived in a world that could erupt at any moment into fire, I think that really about the fact that fire represents the chaos that her family can put on her and how she can still be scarred by it. The fact that it keeps her on her toes lets the reader kind of get a perspective into this like little kid's life, that she has to be always aware of things and she always has to be looking out for herself, which is what her parents should be doing for her. It continues to say, after the hotel burned down, we lived for a few days on the beach. When we put down the back seat of the green caboose, there was room for everyone to sleep, though sometimes someone's feet would be sticking in my face. One night, a policeman tapped on our window and said we had to leave. It was illegal to sleep on the beach. He was nice and kept calling his folks and even drew a map to a place where we could sleep without getting arrested. But after he left, Dad called him a goddamn Gestapo and said that people like that got their jollies pushing around people like us. Dad was fed up with civilization. He and Mom decided we should move back to the desert and resume our hunt for gold without our starter money. These cities will kill you, he said. The dad's kind of hatred for society, I think, shows that even though the policeman was really nice, it shows he's gonna hate society no matter what, kind of. The fact that society has been trying to be kind, the fact that this policeman has been kind and understanding, and the dad still says these cities will kill you and he's fed up with civilization, shows that he's never really going to change his mind. He's really set on the kind of life that he wants his family to live in. My passage continues on to a metaphor that I thought was really interesting, where the mom describes the Joshua tree. It's on page 35. It starts out by saying, after we pulled up stakes in San Francisco, we headed for the Mojave Desert. Near the Eagle Mountains, Mom made Dad stop the car. She'd seen a tree on the side of the road that had just caught her fancy. It wasn't just any tree, it was an ancient Joshua tree. It stood in a crease of land where the desert ended and the mountain began, forming a wind tunnel. From the time the Joshua tree was a tiny sapling, it had been so beaten down by the whipping wind that rather than trying to grow skyward, it had grown in the direction that the wind pushed it. It existed now in a permanent state of wind-blownness, leaning over so far that it seemed ready to topple, although, in fact, its roots held firmly in place. I think this tree so clearly represents Jeanette. She just went on to explain how fire has scarred her and she can never be kind of normal, I guess. And in this passage, it explains that this tree has been so beaten down that it's grown crooked, I guess you could say. And it's permanently in that state of windblownness, it says. And it seems like it's ready to topple, which I think she explains when she says, I'm ready to, my world's gonna erupt into fire any moment. I think that is really clearly paralleled to this part. But what this part in the book explains that the fire part didn't explain was that the roots held firmly in place. I think that's really important for the reader to notice that the roots were firmly in place, because it shows that even though Jeanette has been, pushed around and scarred by the fire and the windblownness of this tree, it just shows how strong she really is and that she can kind of do whatever she wants, which is obviously shown by the end of the book. It continues by saying, I thought the Joshua tree was ugly. It looked scraggly and freakish, permanently stuck in its twisted, tortured position. And it made me think of how some adults tell you not to make weird faces because your features could freeze. Mom, however, thought it was one of the most beautiful trees she'd ever seen. She told us she had to paint it. While she was setting out her easel, Dad drove up the road to see what was ahead. He found a scattering of parched little houses, trailers settling into the sand, and shacks with rusty tin roofs. It was called Midland. One of the little houses had a for rent sign. What the hell, Dad said. This place is as good as any other. Both of the parents make such spur-of-the-moment decisions, and they don't plan anything. And they don't think about the consequences. The mom will constantly pull over. Through the entire book, she just pulls over and wants to paint something. When Jeanette explains that she thought the tree was ugly, but her mom thought it was beautiful, I thought that was a interesting thing that the author, Miss Walls, put in the book, because it does explain the little positive part, the little positive that the mom had, which was she could see kind of the beauty in everything. It continues and says, the house we rented had been built by a mining company. It was white with 2 rooms and a swayed back roof. There were no trees, and the desert sand ran right up to the back door. At night you could hear coyotes howling. When we first got to Midland, those coyotes kept me awake, and as I laid in bed, I'd hear other sounds. Gila monsters rustling in the underbrush, moths knocking against the screens, and the creosote crackling in the wind. One night, when the lights were out and I could see a sliver of the moon through the window, I heard a slithering noise across the floor. I think there's something under the bed, I said to Lori. It's merely a figment of your overly active imagination, Lori said. She talked like a grown-up when she was annoyed. I tried to be brave, but I had heard something. In the moonlight, I saw it move. Something's there, I whispered. Go to sleep, Lori said. Holding my pillow over my head for protection, I ran into the living room where Dad was reading. What's that, mountain goat? He asked. He called me that because I never fell down when we were climbing mountains. Sure-footed as a mountain goat, he'd always say. Nothing, probably, I said. I just think maybe I saw something in the bedroom. Dad raised his eyebrows. But it was probably just a figment of my overly active imagination. Jeanette tries to impress her dad so often. She wants to kind of impress him with her courage. And it shows that she's not really completely comfortable with her dad. She just wants to kind of impress him. So this next part I thought was really interesting because it shows how immature and childish the dad is. He says, "Did you get a good look at it?" he asked. "Not really." "You must have seen it. Was it a big old hairy son of a bitch with the damnedest looking teeth and claws?" "That's it." "And did it have pointed ears and evil eyes with fire in them, and did it stare at you all wicked like?" he asked. Yes, you've seen it too." "Better believe I have. That's the old orny bastard demon." Dad said he'd been chasing demons for years, but by now, Dad said, that old demon had figured out that if it better not mess with Rex Walls. But if that sneaky son of a gun thought it was going to terrorize Rex Walls' little girl, it had by God had another think coming. "Go fetch my hunting knife," Dad said. I got Dad his knife with the carved bone handle and the blade of blue German steel, and he gave me a pipe wrench, and we went looking for Demon. We looked under the bed where I had seen it, but it was gone. We looked all around the house, under the table, in the dark corners of the closets, in the toolbox, even outside in the trash cans. "Come here, you old sorry-ass demon," Dad called into the desert night. "Come out and show your butt-ugly face, you yellow-bellied monster." "Yeah, come on, you old mean demon," I said, waving the pipe wrench in the air. "We're not scared of you." This part I thought really especially showed that she's still just such a little kid, and she's so mature that the reader often forgets her age, so that's why I thought this part in the book was especially important to just kind of remind us that she's still just a little girl, and she often seems so mature. So the passage continues and it says, "There was only the sound of the coyotes in the distance." "This is just like that chicken shit demon," Dad said. He sat down on the front step and lit up a cigarette and told me a story about the time Demon was terrorizing an entire town, and Dad fought it off in hand-to-hand combat, biting its ears and sticking his fingers in his eyes. Old Demon was terrified because that was the first time it had met anyone who wasn't afraid of it. "Damned old demon didn't know what to think," Dad said, shaking his head with a chuckle. That was the thing to remember about all monsters," Dad said. "They love to frighten people, but the minute you stare them down, they turn tail and run. All you have to do, Mountain Goat, is show old demon that you're not afraid." He's kind of ironically giving her advice for dealing with him and her mom. She proves this when she grows up and she moves out because she shows that she's not afraid of her parents. The symbolism of the fire and the Joshua tree really paralleled quite well, and I think the author did that on purpose by juxtapositioning them together. This passage just had so many features that were definitely needed in order to remind the reader that Jeanette's still a little girl. She might be windblown and scarred by fires that she's created herself, and that she scarred herself, but her roots are still firmly planted. I think this passage is really crucial for the development of Jeanette, and it also gives the reader a better insight onto her inner thoughts and ideas on her experiences.